Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Another series in the Rasool's Path. Another series in the Rasool's Path series of talks, collaboration between the Islamic Center of Boston, Wayland, and Qalam Institute. We're really fortunate to have Ustadha Sally Elhousieny here with us tonight, and she'll be speaking about a very interesting topic: the struggle to survive in the seerah of beloved Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Ustadha Sally Elhousieny is a Qalam Alami student from the class of 2024, and she currently resides in Seattle, Washington. Is joining us from there. Serves in the capacity of middle school Arabic and Islamic studies teacher at Medina Academy there, and really delighted to have her to discuss this really important aspect of the seerah, the important time in Mecca, and the struggle to survive. Ustadha Sally.
Perfect. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil mursaleen wa ala khatimil nabiyyin amma ba'd. Today we're going to be talking about the struggle to survive. And we're going to hit three main points in the seerah. We're going to talk about the boycott of Banu Hashim, and then we're going to talk about the year of sorrow, and then we're going to talk about the journey to Taif. So just kind of little markers of what we're going to cover, inshallah. I just want to recap. So you guys talked about before with Imam Muhammad Herbert, you guys talked about how the Prophet ﷺ received revelation. And then with Ustadha Zainab Yunus, you guys talked about the first migration to Habasha. So now we're back in Mecca, kind of situate yourself back in Mecca, and we're going to start there. All right. Bismillah, Allahumma shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So we're now in like the 6th, 7th year of prophethood, and the Quraysh, the leaders of Quraysh, they are very angry. Okay, they are so mad at the Prophet ﷺ because they're like, the Muslims are gaining traction, the Muslims are listening to the Prophet, and they deem him to be a prophet, and we're not, like, we're supposed to be the elites, like we're supposed to be in charge, and it's not looking like that, and we don't like it. So Quraysh is just really mad. And so they were like, okay, what can we do to have the Muslims stop being Muslims? And so they were like, okay, let's just make their lives really hard. Like, let's torture them. And so they try torturing them, and they have literally, like, this is where the stories of Bilal radiallahu anhu being dragged through like the desert of Mecca and all of that stuff, but it's not working. They try all these torture tactics, like so much torture tactics, the FBI is jealous, and it's not working. It's not working. And so they're very frustrated. And so Quraysh was like, okay, so we're torturing them and it's not working. What else can we do? How can we be on top again? And so Quraysh, they're like, you know what? We are going to just boycott the whole tribe. Just to teach them a lesson, we're going to boycott Banu Hashim. And I'm just going to pause here real quick, because this is unheard of in Arab society. Like, nobody who is in Arabia at this moment has ever even heard of the concept boycotting your own tribe. Like, tribalism is so entrenched in their culture. So for somebody to say, oh, we're just not going to talk to our own family members because of whatever, was just unheard of. Okay, so Abu Talib, he's a protector of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so the leaders of Quraysh, they go to him and they're like, listen, Abu Talib, if you do not give us the Prophet ﷺ right now, we're gonna cut you guys off. We're gonna cut all of you guys off. And so Abu Talib is like, first of all, I'm not gonna give you the Prophet, so you can literally take that idea and throw it away. Yeah, that's it, literally full stop. There's nothing else to say. And so Quraysh is like, fine, we're gonna cut you guys off. And so they take a piece of paper and they take a pen, which I assume they had in the desert, and they write down. They're like, Bismillah, in the name of God, we, the tribes, some powerful tribes in Mecca, we are not going to talk to the Muslims. We're not going to look at the Muslims. We're not going to buy and sell from the Muslims. We're not going to have them get married to anyone. Like, it's just cut off. Okay. Don't look at them. Don't talk to them. Okay. And they took this paper. Everybody signed it. Not everybody, but some of the very powerful tribes of Mecca, they signed it and they rolled it up, put it in a leather bag, and then they hung it on the Kaaba, inside the Kaaba on the wall. Okay, so nobody can tamper with it. and it was out in the open. So this started the boycott, okay? It's officially started. Abu Talib has a valley kind of like on the, what's it called? On the little like outskirts, or not outskirts, but he had like a valley, okay? And it's called Shi'b Abi Talib. So that's where Abu Talib takes Banu Hashim, and that's where they retreat. I totally forgot to do this, okay? And so they take Banu Hashim, and that's where they retreat. And so they retreat to Shi'b Abu Talib, or Abi Talib. And the conditions of the boycott are very, very severe. I mean, do you guys remember COVID? We had COVID for 1 year, okay? We had COVID for 1 year, and it was a brutal year, right? Like, we were isolated from everyone. We had to stay in our homes. We were not able to like go out like we used to. People couldn't go see family. People couldn't travel. Like, it was isolation, right? The boycott was nothing compared to that. It was way, way worse, okay? Because we had the internet, we had the outside, like we had stuff. But the boycott was just complete isolation, okay? They were so cut off, they had no regular food supply. Like, just imagine you're literally in a tent with a bunch of people, everybody, elderly, young people, pregnant women, like everyone. You're in tents with them in a valley. There's no regular food supply. There's no financial income. There's nothing. You have nothing other than yourselves. That's it. And so it was so, so hard for the Muslims. It was really hard for the Muslims. And so people back in Mecca, some of the tribes that didn't sign the boycott, they're kind of seeing this and they're like, okay, this is really inhumane. Like, what's going on here? Like, we've never done this before. We've never even thought of doing anything like this. So people back in Mecca are kind of like, okay, this is crazy. And I just, again, want to remind you that this lasted 3 years. COVID was 1 year and it took us out, right? That the boycott was 3 years. So like, if you're in school, that's like middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all of that, right? So like, that's such a long time. That's 3 summers, 3 winters. Like, it's such a long time. And so people are dying, children are dying, like it's not a good time, okay? It's really, really tough on the Muslims. And Abu Talib, the protector of the Prophet ﷺ, he is on high alert and he is stressed because he's like, I don't know what has possessed Quraysh. Like, I don't know why they're taking this so personally, but I'm worried that if I don't like have my eyes on the Prophet ﷺ for like 1 minute, that something bad's going to happen. So every night, Abu Talib would wake up the Prophet ﷺ and be like, you need to go somewhere else, like sleep in another tent because I don't know what can happen. So he would literally try to move him in different tents so that nobody can find him and nobody can assassinate him in the night. Okay. And so this goes on for years, like literally like a day in the life of the Prophet ﷺ would be waking up, making dua and go visiting the sick because everyone was sick and they're starving. There's no sleep. It's just terrible. And so this happens for 3 years. And then kind of by the end of the 3 years, there's an incident that happens with a man named Hakim ibn Hizam. Okay. He is the nephew of Khadija radiallahu anha, but he's not from Banu Hashim. So a lot of the people, I also do want to clarify that not all of Banu Hashim were Muslims. There were Muslims and non-Muslims. Those non-Muslims that stayed in the boycott did out of tribalism. Again, like, you can't just have part of the family being treated badly and the other part not. Like, tribalism was such a huge part of their culture. And so Hakim and the people back in Mecca would try to smuggle in little by little food for the people that were in Shi'b Abi Talib because they knew that they had no regular food. So they would try to like sneak in food to them. Okay. So Hakim bin Hizam, one day he goes and he decides to give his aunt some food. Okay. So just a little bit of food for his aunt. No big deal. But he runs into none other than Abu Jahl. Okay. And Abu Jahl sees this and he's like, what's going on? What's that? What are you doing? And so Hakim is like, listen, like, I'm just giving food for my aunt. Like, it's not that deep. Everybody can calm down. Like, it's just a little bit of food for my aunt. Like, please calm down. And so a man by the name of Abu Balta'a, Abu Bukhtari, okay, he comes through and he sees this fight about to happen. Like he's looking at Abu Jahl and he's like, if looks could kill, like this is not looking good. So Abu Bukhtari comes in and he's like, what's going on here? And so Abu Jahl tells him, like, this guy is trying to take food to his aunt, who is part of the boycott. And Abu Bukhtari is like, what's wrong with that? Like, it's just so little food. Like, it's not even going to feed the whole tribe. It can barely feed one person. Like, it's not a big deal. Abu Jahl hears this and he loses his mind. He's like, he just loses his mind. He just has an absolute fit and he swings. He just goes for it. He just hits him. Okay. And Abu Bukhtari hits back. And so it's like a full-on fight right now. And there's like screaming, there's yelling, people are like, calm down, all of this stuff. So there's commotion. And so people from the valley, they hear people from the valley here, and they come and they kind of separate everyone. And they're like, okay, everybody, like, calm down. Please chill. But word spreads like wildfire, and people in Mecca are like, oh my God, there's civil unrest. Like, people are not just dying from the boycott, but now there's fights breaking out, and Abu Jahl is at the center of this. Like, what's going on? Okay. And so the people in Mecca that were opposed to the boycott, they start vocalizing like, hey, maybe this is not a good idea, and maybe we should stop this. Like, maybe 3 years is too much, you know, about time. But anyway, okay. So Abu Talib uses this and he goes to the people of Mecca and he tries to appeal to their tribalism. And he's like, listen, like, what is it that is making you do this? Like, what is possessing you guys to treat us this way? Okay. And so the leaders of Quraysh, Abu Talib goes to the Prophet ﷺ and tells him, he's like, okay, so I'm going to try to talk to the people of Quraysh. I'm going to try to get to to appeal to their tribalism. And like, that's my plan. So the Prophet ﷺ makes dua to Allah, and Allah reveals to him at that moment that that document is eaten. Okay. So there's no more document anymore. It's been eaten by whatever, bugs or whatever. Okay. So Abu Talib takes this information. He goes to the leaders of Quraysh and he's like, listen, you guys, okay, I don't even know where to start. He goes to the leaders of Quraysh and he's like, how dare you, leaders of Quraysh, accuse the Prophet ﷺ of tearing the community apart when it's you who left your own people to suffer for not 1, not 2, but 3 years. Like, you guys have the audacity to say that the Prophet ﷺ is separating families and all of this stuff with Islam, but like, you come here and you literally cut your own family off for 3 years. Like, the math is not mathing. Like, my head hurts trying to understand this. And so Abu Talib tells them, he's like, the Prophet ﷺ told me, and we know he's a truthful man and he's never lied. He told me that cute little document that you guys have, that you wrote, that like oppressive conditions to the boycott, it's eaten and it's no longer there. So if you guys want to check that, I'll be right here. And so Quraysh is like, first of all, that's impossible because we've had eyes on it the whole time and it's been in the Kaaba and you've been in Shi'ab Abi Talib. And so they're like, if that's not true, we're taking the Prophet. And Abu Talib is like, whatever, just look at the document. Okay. And so they come, they bring the document, they're opening the leather, they're like, see. And then they look at the thing and they're like, oh my God, it's eaten. And they're shook because they're like, oh shoot, we have to like stop the boycott now. And Abu Jahl comes in and he's trying to like make everything fine. He's like, guys, everybody calm down. Like, he's a magician, remember? Muhammad is a magician. So don't take this seriously. This is just a magic trick. Everything's going to be fine. You guys don't have to like freak out or anything. We can continue the boycott. Everyone's like, Abu Jahl, please be quiet. Like, somebody put this man on a leash, okay? And the community and everybody ends the boycott. Sorry, I keep forgetting to use the slides. But because of the no contract, the boycott ends, okay? And so that's the end of the boycott. But as we all know, when COVID ended, did COVID actually end? No, there was aftermath of COVID, right? Like, it didn't just like, oh, 3 years are over, everything can go back to normal. No, like, even with 1 year of COVID, things did not go back to normal. And so after 3 years of the boycott, a lot of people fell very ill and a lot of people had passed away. And so so this is where we transition into the year of sorrow. Okay, Aam al-Huzn. So two very prominent figures in the Prophet ﷺ's life had passed away. Okay, the first being Abu Talib. And Abu Talib is the caretaker of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Like he is his uncle, but also he's the one that protected the Prophet ﷺ for as long as he's been alive. Like nobody from Quraysh could touch the Prophet ﷺ because Abu Talib was alive. And so his death caused a lot of like unrest within Mecca because everybody was like, oh, it's open season. Who's going to stop me from hurting Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Okay. And so when Abu Talib was on his deathbed, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him. Okay. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him and he walks into his house. He sees Abu Talib on the deathbed. And there were other people, the leaders of Quraysh were there, like Abu Jahl, Abu Umayyah and them. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam looks at them and he's like, can I please have a moment alone with my uncle? Like he's dying. I really, really just want to be alone with him. So can you guys please give me that? But obviously, because they're the worst people ever, they were like, no, immediately no. Like, what do you mean give you some space? Like, what? How dare you even ask? And so the Prophet ﷺ was like, okay. And so he sits down with Abu Talib and he's like, oh, my beloved uncle, you took care of me and you did everything for me. And I just need your help with one thing. Like, I just need one thing from you. And if you say it, I got you. Like, I will defend you. I will stand up on your behalf with Allah. Like, I'll take it from there. I just ask you to say one thing. That's it. Okay. And it was the Shahada, obviously. But Abu Talib replies and he's like, oh, my beloved nephew, like, I love you so much. But if I wasn't so afraid of the shame that could come to me just from accepting these words or saying these words on my deathbed, or like, if I wasn't so afraid of my children being mocked because their dad was a coward and he gave in and he was afraid of death in his final moments, I would say what you want. But I'm just so afraid of that. And I don't think I can have that kind of life for my kids. And so Abu Jahl and Abu Umayyah, they hear this and they're like, they take advantage of this and they're like, oh my God, he cannot accept Islam, not on our watch. And so they come in and they butt in and they're like, yeah, what are you going to do, Abu Talib? Are you going to forget the gods of your father? Like, you're just going to up and leave the tradition? You're going to leave what's going to happen to the tribe if you accept Islam? Like, think long term here. And so Abu Talib just stays quiet. And his last words were, أنا على ملة عبد المطلب. I'm on the belief of Abd al-Muttalib. And he passes away. And this is heartbreaking for the Prophet ﷺ. It was so, so hard because he not only was his uncle died, but also his protector died. And also he died not a Muslim. And so that really, really hurt the Prophet ﷺ. It was really hard for him. And so that was the first death that really kick-started the year of sorrow. The next death that did so was the death of Khadija radiallahu anha. And Khadija radiallahu anha, like, there's no words to put how much she meant to the Prophet ﷺ. Like, they were married for 25 years. She was the mother of his children. Like, she was his number one supporter, his ride or die. Like, she was everything to him. Like, when everyone doubted him, she was the one that was like, no, you are perfect. And God chose you to be the prophet. Don't ever doubt that for a second. Right? And when people would come to the Prophet ﷺ and ask him about her, they'd be like, tell us about Khadija. He couldn't even put it into words. He was like, kanat wa kanat. She was and she was. Like, what? How can I even start to describe who Khadija was to me? Okay. And so it was very, very hard to have literally the Prophet ﷺ's soulmate pass away as well as his uncle. And their death wasn't just the Prophet ﷺ grieving. Like, that was a big part of the year of sorrow. But the other big part of it was how Quraysh, like, what their death meant, right? It meant that Quraysh was unhinged. Like, there was nothing stopping them from literally killing the Prophet ﷺ. And we'll see, like, there's so many stories of all these things that Quraysh had started to do, like intensifying the harassment of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. And so we have narrations of, like, literally So Abu Jahl, okay, he's like chilling with his cronies and they're like at the Kaaba and he sees the Prophet ﷺ come and start to pray at the Kaaba, okay? And Abu Jahl is like, wait a minute. I remember there was a camel being slaughtered just 2 minutes from here, BRB. So he actually has one of his cronies go get like camel intestines and camel skin and come put it on the Prophet ﷺ as he was in sujood. And I don't know if you guys know how heavy camel skin and intestines are. I don't, but they're heavy. And they were so heavy that the Prophet ﷺ couldn't get out of sujood. So he actually had to stay there until someone could come and just push it off. And so obviously Abu Jahl and them are laughing and all this stuff. And Fatima radiallahu anha, the Prophet ﷺ's daughter, who was no like bigger than 6 or 7 years old, she comes crying and she pushes this stuff off of her dad. And she's crying. She's like, Dad, like, what's going on? Like, why are they treating you like this? And the Prophet ﷺ tells her, do not cry. Allah will defend your father. Like, don't worry about Allah has my back. Allah has our back. And things get worse. So they would literally they would tell anybody that sees the Prophet ﷺ praying, just take his shawl and choke him. And so they would choke him in salah. Like that was a thing that they would do. They would like throw random things at him, like spit at him. They would say nasty, nasty things to him. They would torture the Sahaba. They would kill the Sahaba. Like people were afraid to stop what they were doing to the Prophet ﷺ because they were afraid that Quraysh would kill them, and they would kill them. Like it wasn't even like, oh my God, they might kill me. No. It was, they will kill me. So it was that bad, right? And so things just kept getting worse and worse. And there's like no protection in Mecca. Like Mecca has become no man's land now. Like even like Quraysh, if you think about it, like they had like, this is a sacred place for them as well. Like this wasn't a thing where, oh, Mecca is like, we can hurt anyone in Mecca. Like Mecca was sacred to them as well. So for them to break all their rules just to torture the Prophet ﷺ was just wild on all fronts. And so because of how terrible things become in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ has to think long-term. And he's like, we have to go somewhere else. We can't stay here anymore because it's unbearable in Mecca. It's unsuitable. Like we can't stay here anymore. Like more people are going to die and it's just not safe. And so the Prophet ﷺ is thinking of a place called Ta'if. And so Ta'if is a little ways outside of Mecca. It's like, I don't know, like I saw it on Google Maps. It said like 93 kilometers. So whatever that means to you, I think that's like 57 miles. But I also did it from the Kaaba, not from Mecca. So anyway, just within that range, okay? It would take like an hour, 45 minutes drive, according to Google Maps. So what happens is the Prophet ﷺ is like, okay, I'm going to go to Ta'if and I will try to appeal to them to get asylum. Okay. And so the Prophet ﷺ is like, okay, I'm not gonna, this is just a one-man journey. Like, this is not something, I don't need like a lot of people. I don't want to freak them out. It's just, I'm going to take myself and I'm going to take Zayd ibn Haritha. And Zayd ibn Haritha, we know, is the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ. So very, very close to the Prophet ﷺ. And so they both go to to Ta'if. And the Prophet ﷺ goes, and before, obviously, like you can't just talk to a people without talking to the leader of the people. So the Prophet ﷺ goes and he talks to the leaders of Ta'if, okay? And they were 3 brothers. And so these 3 brothers, one of them was actually married to a woman from Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ was like, okay, like it's not gonna be that bad. Like I'm just gonna ask them nicely for asylum. So it's not gonna be that bad, inshallah. And so he goes, he tries to talk to them. He's like, the life in Mecca is just getting really hard. Quraysh is making it really, really tough to live. And can we please make Ta'if a temporary home until things calm down in Mecca? Like just a little bit, like I just need a place for us to be so that we can stay safe. And so the leaders of Ta'if, they were kind of like, interesting. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And they disrespect the Prophet ﷺ so much. They literally tell him, they're like, I don't understand why God chose you as a prophet. Like there was nobody else to be a prophet. Why did he choose you? And another one was like, I will literally go rip the cloth off the Kaaba if you're actually a prophet. Like I can't even believe it. Like it was just so there's nothing other than the word audacity that comes to mind. So they are just so outright like disrespectful. And so again, there's just so much happening. Like we had the boycott, and then we had the year of sorrow. And then now again, like the one place that they could go for help and asylum, they're being kicked out of. And so the Prophet ﷺ's like, okay, like I did my best. I'm just gonna ask you guys for one more thing. Like, can you guys just do me a favor and just let us leave quietly? Like, we don't want to make a big scene because we don't want Quraysh to see this as like another reason to make things worse. Like if Quraysh hears that I'm here trying to find asylum, they'll like call out a war. And that's just too much to worry about, right? Like, I just don't want that. Okay. And so they were like, first of all, you don't make the rules here, we do. So you even like thinking that you can say something to us and we'll listen? Like, no. And so again, they disrespect him even more. And they tell the leaders of Ta'if, they tell the people of Ta'if, they're like, these two guys, give them a hard time. So the people of Ta'if, literally, okay, so let me just paint the scene. So the Prophet ﷺ, okay, very disheartened because he has to go back home and figure out another plan because Ta'if just said no, okay? And back home means more torture. So it's just all around just a very bad situation. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he's disheartened. He and Zayd ibn Haritha, they're about to leave. And as they're leaving, they see, like they're leaving the place where they were talking to the three brothers, they see like the people of Ta'if, okay? This is like youth and like just the population of Ta'if in two lines, okay? So think of like two, you know, the red carpet? So kind of like on two sides, just full of people, like row of people on both sides. And then the Prophet ﷺ and Zayd ibn Haritha walking in the middle. And so the people of Ta'if tell their people, they're like, take whatever you have, stones, whatever you want, and throw it at them. Like give them a hard time. But they told them, don't kill the Prophet ﷺ because that would mean war and we just don't want to get our hands dirty right now. But you can aim wherever else, just don't kill him. And Zayd ibn Haritha, open season, whatever you want, we don't care, haha. And then they left, okay? And so the Prophet ﷺ and Zayd ibn Haritha, they're leaving and they're being pelted, like literally, I can't even imagine it, where you have people taking stones at all angles and hitting you with stones. And you're walking, and this didn't happen for like a minute or two, which would still be so long, being pelted for a minute or two. This happened for miles, like 3 miles of them walking and being pelted by the people of Ta'if. Like 3 miles of what? Like I can't even walk 3 miles without my feet aching, let alone having rocks being thrown at me and having to step on those rocks as I'm leaving. And so they're aiming for the Prophet ﷺ's feet. So his feet are they're so bloodied, and his sandals are just getting redder and redder and redder as they get soaked with blood. And Zayd ibn Haritha, obviously, he's trying to protect the Prophet ﷺ. So he's like trying to protect the Prophet, all of this stuff, but because they don't care if they kill him or not, they're hitting him anywhere. And so he gets hit on the head. The Prophet ﷺ is trying to help him up. They're trying to like rush out because this is such a painful scene. This is so painful, like emotionally and physically. And so this happens for miles. They're walking, trying to get out of the city as fast as they can. And finally, after 3 miles, they reach this place called Qarn al-Tha'alib. Okay, and that's kind of where the people of Ta'if are like, okay, show's over, let's all go home. It was fun while it lasted. And the Prophet ﷺ and Zayd ibn Haritha, they just sit. They find somewhere and they just sit. And the Prophet ﷺ, his feet are so soaked in blood. His clothes are so bloodied that his shoes were stuck to him. You know when you have a Band-Aid on for a really long time and like it hurts to take it off? Yeah, this is a whole shoe. Okay, and it's stuck to his foot. And so he couldn't even take it off. And the Prophet is so upset because of all of the stuff that's happening. And so Zayd ibn Haritha, he comes and he has to actually rip the shoes, like rip the Prophet's sandals off of his feet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it makes it obviously worse because you're ripping skin off now as well. And so it's just so much pain and so much blood. Prophet ﷺ immediately, because he is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, raises his hands. He raises his hands and he makes a dua called Dua al-Mustada'afin. And I have that on the screen. And that's like his immediate first reaction, making dua to Allah. And he just complains to Allah about, he's like, Allah, I'm just going to summarize, as long as you're not mad at me, there's nothing else that I care about. And that's it. Like, I'm calling to you because of my lack of strength and my weakness. But as long as you're not mad at me, Ya Allah, I can handle the world. I can do anything. And so Allah, after that response, or after that dua, Angel Jibreel comes, and Angel Jibreel tells him, Allah heard what you said, and Angel Jibreel brings another angel who is the angel of the mountains. Okay. And so Angel Jibreel tells the Prophet ﷺ, you give him the word, just say the word, and this angel will take the two mountains that are on either side of Ta'if. Okay. He'll take them over the city and he'll crush the city, and it'll be as if Ta'if never existed. Okay. The city will be as if it never existed. So imagine the people, like, just give us the word. Just give us the word. Jibreel alayhi salam is just like, just give him the word and he'll take care of it. And you don't even have to like worry about Ta'if again. Don't even like think about Ta'if ever again. But the Prophet ﷺ, because he is the Prophet ﷺ, rahmatan lil alameen, literally mercy to mankind, he was like, no, it's okay. I'm going to make dua for them instead. And so the Prophet ﷺ prayed for their guidance and the guidance of their future generations. And he made dua that if they don't accept Islam, their progeny accepts Islam. And he was like their progeny inshallah will accept Islam. And that's all I need. And so this is just such a pivotal moment, because the Prophet ﷺ had the means to literally destroy Ta'if. But the Prophet ﷺ is like, I'm a messenger and I want people to be saved. I want people to know Allah and to become Muslim and go to Jannah. Like, that's my job. And so that happens. And then after they rest for a bit on their way back to Mecca, they actually pass by a garden, and it's owned by Utbah bin Rabi'a and his brother Shaybah bin Rabi'a. And they hear what happened to the Prophet ﷺ in Ta'if. And so they tell their servant Addas to give the Prophet ﷺ some food. And so Addas comes and he brings grapes and he brings all of that stuff and he gives it to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ takes a grape and he says Bismillah and he eats it. And so Addas is like, what did you just say? And so the Prophet ﷺ said, oh, Bismillah, like in the name of Allah. And he's like, Addas is like, I've never heard that from the people of Mecca. Like, where did you get that from? And so the Prophet ﷺ asked him, he's like, Addas, where are you from? And he's like, oh, I'm from Nainawa. I'm from Nainawa. And so the Prophet ﷺ is like, oh, that's where Yunus bin Matta is. And Addas is like, you know Yunus? And the Prophet ﷺ is like, yeah, he's my brother. I'm a prophet, and he's also a prophet. And Allah told me his story. And so Addas was so overwhelmed by this experience and just felt so seen that he like immediately accepted Islam. He was like, yes, this is what I was waiting for. Like, I've never heard anyone say Bismillah before. And so it's just so beautiful to see that even though the Prophet ﷺ was like, is at literally the lowest point, right? Like, so much hardship is hitting from like every direction constantly, he's still giving dawah. Like, the Prophet ﷺ didn't forget his job and continues to guide people even though he's going through it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that concludes the journey of Ta'if, and then they go back to Mecca, and then I'm not going to spoil it, but Isra and Mi'raj happen next. And that's going to be next session, inshallah. But yeah, as for now, any questions?
Ustadha Sally, thank you so much for a very motivating and detailed account of those years in Mecca. Let's open up for questions. Certainly, people can unmute and ask questions. You can also type questions in the chat if you like.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Mahmoud. I thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I had two questions. One, in the year of sorrow, I recollect reading maybe there were three events or three deaths that took place in the year of sorrow, and now you mentioned two in your slides. Am I misremembering, or was there a third one, or did we not cover that today for this session? And my second question is related to the story that you just concluded with Taif, with the gentleman taking the Shahada after hearing the Prophet say Bismillah. Do you happen to know the backstory of him and his history and how he ended up coming to Taif? Because I think that he has a rather interesting backstory himself and how he found himself in that garden employed by those two brothers.
Yes. So for your first question, I know of these two prominent figures that died kickstarting the year of sorrow. I don't doubt that other people died as well. I'm not aware of the third person that you're talking about. If you know a name, I can confirm, but I can't think of the third person now. As for Addas, you are right. He does have an interesting story. So he was actually he's the slave of Utbah and Shayba, right? And what's it called? And so he had been experiencing slavery for a really long time in an absence of faith. And so he when he heard that from the Prophet, that's when it kind of kickstarted. And he was like, oh, I remember faith, right? I remember religion now. And Utbah and Shayba didn't really treat him well. And so Addas, when he became Muslim, Utbah and Shayba talked to him and they were like, what are you doing? You're being corrupted by this man. And Addas was like, listen, you can't convince me that there's anyone else on this face of the earth that's better than him. He told me something that only another prophet would know. And so Utbah and Shayba, they're like, don't let him make you abandon your faith, right? Don't trust him, he's a liar and all of that stuff. But Addas, he's like, I'm convinced, the Prophet ﷺ he literally had all the signs of prophethood, and he knew something that only a prophet would know, right? So that kind of convinced him even more that the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet. I hope that answers the question. Anything else?
Other questions? Ustadha Sadi, I had a quick question. So, the 3 years of the boycott. Can you say a little bit more about? I mean, certainly people died, and there was lack of food and resources. But was this actually also a physical boycott? And how exactly, do the books and history describe that physical boycott of the location where the Muslims were housed outside Mecca?
So in the terms of physical boycott, it was, if you can't they didn't, so being isolated in the terms being isolated physically, as in not being even allowed in their own homes, that was kind of part of the isolation, right? Think about it, if they had homes that were not owned by Banu Hashim or anything like that, they were not allowed in their own homes. So they had to go and kind of find their own place. And so that was kind of part of the physical isolation aspect of it, but also not being able to be in business with anyone, right? So they couldn't buy and sell from anyone. So again, it would be when they would see someone from Banu Hashim, they would kind of just look away, because they were we're not allowed to look at you. We're not allowed to do any business with you, anything, they pretended that they didn't exist for as much as they could.
And then go ahead.
No, that was it.
And could you say a few words about when around this time was in the year of sorrow when when Surah Yusuf was revealed? Was it around the same time?
Yeah, yeah. And so Quran was being revealed during this whole time, and it was to console the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, right? Like these are some of the toughest years, right? And so, yeah, you're right. Surah Yusuf was revealed around this time where, and if you were to read Surah Yusuf, it's one of, again, like Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam goes through so much, and you see the fruits of it at the very end. So the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, his companions, getting that kind of story helps a lot, because it's like, one, another prophet went through so much hardship as well and came back on top. And two, Allah's on our side. Like Allah will never let us go astray. Like we're in good hands because we're with Allah. And if no matter what the people of Quraysh try to do to us, we know that Jannah is there, and we know that that's our goal. So we're just looking at like past all of this pain and looking straight into Jannah, basically. And that's why Quraysh was just so shook, because they were like, we're doing all of this very terrible things to you guys, and they're not budging at all. And it's because like these companions, you know, like they're the ones that are promised Jannah for a reason. Like not only did they stick through it, but they persevered in a way that is just so hard. Like thinking of any of this happening today, the way we would give up so fast. But subhanAllah, these people, this is why they're promised Jannah. And so, yeah, they had, what's it called? They had Surah Yusuf, yeah, come down during this time. Thank you for reminding me, yeah.
Actually, would you tell us a little about the sort of a last comment, maybe it's no other questions, you know, the famous the words in the last part of the surah, La tasriba alaykum al-yawm, that sort of Yusuf has them, and then Abdullah Prophet used the same words when he returned to Mecca, in Fatih Mecca. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah.
How emblematic that was.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, honestly, you guys will feel it when you get to that part in the Sirah, where after you hear all of the things that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba went through, and then you get to the very end where you get to where, so I'm just gonna like, yeah, so I'm trying not to spoil too much, but basically the Prophet ﷺ, they go to Medina, right, for, and they build themselves up there. And then when it's time to go back to Mecca, because they built themselves up enough, they go and they do this conquest of Mecca, and they take back Mecca. And so the Prophet ﷺ, they go back to Mecca, and all of their oppressors are there, right? Like these are people that tortured them for years and gave them the hardest time of their lives. So like, imagine you go back to the people that oppressed you for years. Like, it's just a crazy scene. And then the Prophet ﷺ comes and he says those words that Yusuf said to his brothers, La tathriba alaykum al-yawm. There's no, like, there's no blame on you guys today. Like, I forgive, like, basically all of you. And so it was just such a powerful moment, because it's like everyone's scared, right? Like these people that were oppressing the Muslims for so long, they were terrified, because they're like, oh no, like we're gonna die. Like he's gonna kill everyone. He's gonna like do all this stuff. But the Prophet ﷺ, being the prophet, and again, rahmatan lil alameen, a mercy to mankind, he didn't do that, right? He was like, I forgive. And there were like, if you guys don't give us a hard time, we're not going to give you a hard time. Like, that's it.
Ustadha Sally, thank you so much for a wonderful talk and discussion. Inshallah, this will be recorded and be available on the website. And just for all the attendees, anyone listening to the video, next day or two, we have an incredible session in person with Sheikh Mikail Smith himself. He's visiting ICB Wayland on Friday for khutbah, as well as Friday evening for halaqah with the youth group, as well as us over dinner. So please join us in person at the Jami, at the masjid. Ustadha Sally, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.